So in the last video, we saw that Entei was actually relatively good for free-to-play players, for relatively new players to use on their team. And that is why we used Piggy as an example to compare different Pokemon on her team using the RainNX calculator in order to try and achieve as big a strength as possible. This time, we're going to focus on the long-term players. We're talking about whales. We're talking about people who started playing this game right at the start, who have very powerful Pokemon. Is it worth swapping out a level 55 berry specialist that has berry finding just to use an Entei that's at low level and we don't have the candies or the resources to power it up, and also costs a lot to power up a legendary? And the short answer is, by and large, it's not really worth running an Entei if you've been playing this game for a long time, you've invested a lot of main skill seeds into other powerful Pokemon that you've got on your team, especially if you're matching berry types, especially if you're already matching dish types. So today we're going to use my account as an example of how good or bad Entei really is. Now, everyone's situation is a bit different. I'm yet to catch a good Entei, and I don't have the resources to get it up to level 50. Not a lot of people would have the resources to get an Entei straight to level 50, even if it's a really good one. For starters, let's look at my original fire team building. So we talked about using a fire team for this week because there are a lot of bonuses for fire team. So I spent a lot of time trying to rush into making a reasonable fire team in order to enjoy the benefits of the +3 main skill level, the 1.5 times multiplier, the extra ingredients, and even though I generally don't like Arcanine, my Arcanine that I've invested in has triple herbs, which helps me cook curries because in both week 1 and week 2 of the event, I rolled for curries, so I needed a lot of herbs for the corn keema curry. In the end, I never caught a good Vulpix, so I don't have a Ninetales on the team, otherwise that would have been a good addition as well. But having a good healer is also very powerful, so that's why I have Gardevoir here to support the entire team. Now, just a little update since the last time we talked about this. Last time we said that ingredient specialists were overvalued if they produce too much ingredients. And that is because, well, the calculator doesn't account for the pot limit. But by pure coincidence, on the day I released that video explaining that, RainNX calculator added a new feature to allow you to actually use the pot capacity as a limit. Meaning that any ingredients that go above and in excess of the pot limit will be wasted. It will be removed from the calculation. You can actually demonstrate this yourself if you remove bottomless pot in your settings. Now, this is on by default, so the numbers that you're looking at as you're playing around with the calculator right now, unless you go to your settings to change something, will still be the same as when I last talked about this in the last video. If you're interested to see what happens when you introduce a pot limit, you would remove bottomless pot, and then let's say I've got a very small pot size, and what will happen is you'll see that the calculator says you're wasting about 50% of the ingredient strength. So it will minus that amount of ingredient strength from your ingredient strength, and you'll see your Pokemon's total strength go down as well. But just for simplicity and consistency, I'm going to activate bottomless pot and assume that all ingredients are never wasted. And to be fair, it's a reasonable way to look at production, because if you're producing too much ingredients, well, you should be swapping out your ingredient specialists anyway, so that overall you're never going to be selling ingredients and wasting any strength. Alright, so let's get started. These are actually real levels of my current team. So I've got level 51 Gardevoir, level 52 Typhlosion. These are real numbers and real stats. Flareon is the weakest one out of all the farmers. Of course, Gardevoir is buffing everyone else, so that's why it looks like it's got low strength, but its real strength comes from the fact that everyone else is stronger because of its existence. Flareon has the lowest number, but in actual fact, the total production strength almost matches that of Charizard. In fact, might even be a little bit more. If I think of Flareon's pot size, expand pot size, as always being filled with ingredients from, for example, from ingredient tickets. So Flareon here shouldn't be assessed on its own. What I mean by that is for me to know how strong this team is, I don't just look at the final number here. The final number being 1.15 million strength by the end of the week. I haven't put in area bonus, so this is just for relative comparisons, but it's a little off because I could use ingredient tickets to fill up those expand pot skills from Flareon. And the way I would account for that is with 4.57 skill triggers per day, with Flareon's +3 main skill level producing 22 pot expansions each trigger, giving a total of 100 pot expansions per day. But also I constantly run a good camp ticket. Now good camp ticket buffs everyone by about 20% in total productions, so it's pretty much a standard across the board. Everyone gets buffed the same amount except for cooking power up Pokemon, because good camp ticket multiplies cooking power up by 1.5 times. So in my case, I can multiply this by 1.5. And each ingredient approximately is worth 137 strength on average. So I need to add about 20,000 strength onto Flareon. If I think of Flareon as in combination of any excess ingredient tickets that I have, or any ingredients that I've overfarmed from the week before that I can use for base ingredients to fill into the pot. So to more accurately look at how Flareon performs, I'm going to add 20,000 to this final strength. Now I can also multiply the chance to crit, so times 1.17. So the average strength per day, we're looking at about 24,000 as long as I utilize as much of those cooking power up as possible. If I don't end up filling the pot, then I shouldn't be using Flareon's skill anyway. But let's say about 20 to 24,000 extra strength per day, you can see that Flareon actually almost outperforms Charizard. But the nuance here is that Charizard isn't using ingredient tickets to back up its own strength, whereas Flareon is. So it's not a fair comparison to say Flareon is stronger just because the number adds up to be more. But I can put it this way, is that, well, if you run out of ingredient tickets, maybe you shouldn't be running Flareon anymore. So we can still look at this analysis as though Flareon can fill up its entire pot size. So in this case, over 7 days, so we add about 150,000 strength to this final number, we're looking at about a weekly total strength of about 1.3 million. That's the number to beat. So now I'm going to look at variations of this Brovini Entei team to see if swapping in Entei would improve things, or even to see swapping in any existing very powerful Pokemon that I already invested to very high level, to see if they can do better than this team that is actually averaging a fairly low level or not. Now note that my favorite berries this week are Fire, Grass, and Ghost. And I happen to have a speed up and berry finding Meganium that I've been using at Lakeside for a long time. So if I change the team up by removing Arcanine and Flareon, and instead put in 2 of the strongest berry Pokemon that I have, one of them being Walrein that has berry finding and helping bonus, the other being currently favorite berry matching, Meganium, and then still run Typhlosion, and still run Charizard for the event bonuses and still have a healer, well, the total strength is 1.4 million. So already I would do better if I ignore the fire team building. The catch here is, well, I actually can't farm enough ingredients to make strong dishes. So there will still be some rotation between these Pokemon, these berry specialists that are not fire types, and also with Arcanine for its fiery herbs. Now just notice I made a little mistake here, so that should be herbs on Typhlosion, but that doesn't make much of a difference anyway because dish types are not considered in my calculations at the moment, just to keep everything simple. So even considering the original fire team with about 1.3 million weekly strength, and considering that Flareon would take all of my ingredient tickets, well, it would just be better, ignoring dishes for now, to run a heavily berry focused team. Of course, noting that these berry specialists that I've had for a long time, so they're very high level. So level 52 on Meganium, level 55 on Walrein. So this is actually the new number to beat. Now, of course, if I run an Entei right now, I would only have 2 fire type Pokemon on the team, and that could nerf Entei's output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my original Brovini Entei team and then swap out each one of these Pokemon to see how Entei would fare if it has 3 fire team members. So for example, if I remove Flareon like this, now my Entei are not very good. One of the better ones I have right now has helping bonus and helping speed, and that's what I'm working with right now. It's going to only be at level 30 because I don't have enough resources, but the point of the matter is I'm trying to see if it's good enough to run during this week 2 of the event. Now I don't need to do the thing where I add extra strength for cooking power up, so now I just look at the final strength. And actually, Entei does really well despite it being at relatively low level. So given that my Entei isn't actually that good, it still almost matches one of my strongest teams. So this is my very heavily berry focused team, and this is my much less heavily focused berry team, but of course noting that right now Entei is +3 main skill level because of the event bonuses. If I gave Entei 2 more seeds, because well, that's one way to actually power up Entei, because getting it to level 50 is harder than just dumping main skill seeds in my situation, it would almost match my strongest team. So an Entei that actually has even better stats than what I have. See, my one has neutral nature and really just has a lot of speed, but beyond that, there's not even any skill triggers. If you had a good Entei, it can be quite powerful. You just need to make sure it's running with a good team. Although to be fair, this Entei has helping bonus, which is indirectly buffing the entire team, not via helper boost, but via speed increase for the whole team. And then I tried subbing out Arcanine instead of subbing out Flareon and looked at the total strength, and of course in this case we have to go back to adding about 150,000 to the final strength, and it turns out to be about 1.4 million again. So we didn't actually make any huge differences based on my current low level fire team Pokemon, but they're all getting a +3 main skill buff and skill trigger buff. It matches that of my strongest berry team. Now what I really don't want to do, but I just want to see what happens, is remove the healer and run a full fire team. Now I don't have a single healer on this team, but at least Entei will be at its max potential. Unfortunately, due to the lack of healing, even if I add 150,000 strength here, this team is overall worse than every other team we've seen so far. So a healer is indispensable, but it's gotta be a good one. So my Gardevoir is level 6 in its healing. And of course I could sub out Charizard for Entei as well, but I would only do that when I'm running too full on my ingredient bag. So when I've got way too many sausages and I just don't need any more sausages, that would be a suitable option as well. So let's see what happens if I do that. And again, we're back to about 1.4 million because I have to add 150 because of Flareon's skill. And of course, if I sub out Typhlosion, that would definitely weaken my team because, well, it's my strongest team member. It does the most amount of strength. And the whole idea of helper boost and helping bonus and all those team skills is to buff the strongest team member. So it makes no sense to swap this out. But you're probably curious to see what happens if I did. So let's have a look. My number goes below 1 million, I add 150 because of Flareon, it goes above 1 million, but overall it's the worst outcome. So you never swap out your strongest Pokemon to put in a healer or a helper boost Pokemon. You always swap out one of your weakest Pokemon, one of the ones that don't make as much sense on your team, for a healer or for a helper boost Pokemon. So interestingly enough, my strongest berry focused team with Meganium and Typhlosion being BFS berry specialists focused on the right favorite berries, and still having Walrein doing non-favorite BFS berry specialist outputs, but having helping bonus buffing the entire team as well. Not to mention my Walrein is actually level 6 in its main skill. I put all of my main seeds into it. So For a whale or a long-term player, you don't really have a real need for Entei, especially considering that Flareon will eat up all of your ingredient tickets during this week. And another interesting thought experiment is to remove Flareon and put Entei, and I was a little bit more impressed by this strength output, 1.4 million, which was closest to my strongest team. Now, what would happen if I power up all my fire Pokemon to level 50, including Entei? Will it actually give me better output than my berry team that had some Pokemon that weren't favorite berries? And yes, indeed, if I were to invest fully into this fire team, then I would achieve the highest number, and it's partly thanks to the event bonuses. So the main reason why my berry focused team is doing so well is actually just because they're very high level. So then it isn't really worth running Entei unless I can power up the entire team to match my strongest Pokemon levels. Now, another interesting variation here is if I remove one of the fire types. So let's say I don't need Arcanine's herbs and I don't really find that its skill is that good. And now I put in my main Meganium that has Berry Finding S. So Helper Boost will still power up Meganium by giving it extra helps, but the Helper Boost skill has gone down. Will it still give me similar, better, or worse total strength output? And in fact, it actually does go up. So it's not an absolute requirement for you to have a full fire team for Entei to be good. It still does reasonably well as long as the rest of the team makes sense. So for example, Meganium matching the favorite berry, well then it's super powerful anyway, so any extra helps, even if reduced amounts, is going to be quite good. Now of course it's not a huge difference, but you can see that a full fire team isn't absolutely required. Now what if I had a Ninetales that was reasonably good? Now this is now becoming more theoretical. This is not so much to do with what I actually have, but rather what we should aim for in the future. Let's say I've got a reasonable Ninetales, has helping speed and berry finding, but then nothing else. And it's up to level 50 at this stage. Well, what kind of output will our team do in that case? We've got 3 favorite berry specialists that all have berry finding now, and they're all being buffed by both the healer and helper boost. Will the total strength go up or go down? And once again, it actually goes up even more. So did it go up because Ninetales is really good and Typhlosion is really good rather than Entei is really good? Well, we'll find out. Let's remove Entei and duplicate a Ninetales and see if we can get similar, better or worse numbers. And overall, we are still fairly high compared to before, but we are reduced in the total weekly strength output. Now, I don't actually plan to have 2 level 50 Ninetales. This was just to see whether the extra strength was coming from Ninetales or if it was coming from Entei. And it turns out, even with an average Entei, I did pretty well with it on the team. So this theoretical team here is one of the best teams I could personally be running if I caught a good Ninetales. My Entei isn't very good, so if you caught a really good Entei, it can actually be quite beneficial. You just have to do the comparisons yourself to see what kind of team output that you'll get from each combination. So the conclusion to me is that, well, I can just use a team I've already invested in. So this team is a real team. I've used these Pokemon for a long time. Typhlosion being a more recent addition to my team, but the rest of these I've used for a long time and they're very high level. I can just use this for a pretty good output, for a pretty good outcome anyway, without having to worry about a full fire team or having to worry about Entei. For free-to-play players or early players who are just starting the game, well, Entei can be quite a good addition. I just personally don't see a need to invest into an Entei unless I get really good stats for one. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments section down below. I will try to answer as many questions as I can, but these days I'm getting a lot more comments. So if you want to stand out from the crowd, don't forget that you can join my membership and I'll respond to your questions with priority. Thank you for watching, guys. Please consider to like and subscribe.